at the workstation back in the US. Okay, hey friends, so I'm back from Bolivia. It was awesome, shot a lot of cool stuff, got really tired, spent some time at high elevations, learned some cool things. It's a great trip. Um, but I thought upon my return, I have a boatload of footage that I need to start working through. And as stoked as I am to actually get into the footage and start, cutting together things and trying to figure out this story, before any of that happens in any project, there's a lot of project organization that needs to happen. And I think a well-organized project, at least in my experience, makes the edit go faster. And if that's footage you think you'll ever come back to in the future, having that organized and logged is a helpful way to make that an easy thing to return to for B-roll for future projects and stuff like that. And so I know there's probably a million videos about how to organize a Premiere Pro or video project in any NLA. But kind of in the spirit of continuing with just creating things and kind of going through my process and learning along the way, I figured I'd make a video about how I go about creating a project and organizing a project on the beginning end of things, and take you along for the ride and ask for feedback. So if anybody out there has suggestions about how I'm organizing this project and things I could do better, I'm open to that. And if you glean a couple of things from this video, great, that's awesome too. So I figure we can kind of jump into the computer here. So while I'm in the field, I always do my absolute best to ingest footage at the end of each day and back it up. So I'll always have two working copies. I'll have my primary copy, and then after I ingest all of my footage off of however many cards and cameras I shoot during that day, I'll get it onto one drive and then immediately make a copy of that drive to a separate drive. So I always have two drives, and I'll pack those separately and keep those separately, and just always have two working copies as often as I can. So I took a 4 terabyte solid state drive down there. And so this is how I organize all of my footage and project files. And basically for each project, I'll have project files. All of my footage will go in here. That's organized by day. And then within that, it's organized by camera, right? And so each camera for the day, I shot an FX3 and a GoPro that day. I shot an A7 IV FX3 GoPro that day. One of these days I'll have my drone, right? And then if I shot any stills, those I usually try and break out separately because I don't always want to bring those into Premiere Pro. Usually I work in those in Lightroom, and if I want to bring in one or two, I can do that after the fact. And typically those, since they're separate from the project, they won't go into photos. Any photos that I bring in for the project, they'll go in here, but this is just kind of where I keep them until I organize them separately here. Digital assets, that's stuff like motion graphics, and that'll be things that I create as I'm going through an edit. Audio, of course, it's sync audio. Any audio that I shot on lavs that I recorded to the lav units as a backup will go in here. So that's mostly backup lav and backup audio. And then as I get into an edit, sound effects and music and stuff like that will go into that as well. So basically this folder here is what kind of a mirror or a copy of this will show up in Premiere Pro. I like keeping my folder structure in Finder or on my computer very close to or identical with my folder structure in my project. But in the field, right, I have to, I ingest all these things. And so I created this Premiere project in the field. And so we're just going to open that up. All right, so we're into this project. And as you can see over here, it's starting to look like it did in Finder, right? If we pop back to Finder, we can see that these folder structures here are similar to over here, and they'll, the empty ones aren't in here yet, but they will be later. But really, the big thing here is footage. All the footage is already in here, and I just today figured I'd show you kind of how I go about organizing footage in Premiere Pro at the beginning of a project. One of the things I like to do is color code my footage by my camera for a couple reasons. One, when it's in my timeline, it helps me kind of know what cameras I'm using, and that immediately takes me back to what I was shooting and how I was shooting, and it helps me kind of work through a cut and edit. But two, also in terms of color correcting, it's easier when I'm getting to the coloring phase of a project to know what camera was used, such that I can quickly go through and make a grade on one file, right, on one piece, and know that that piece will be similar to all these other ones based on the camera that it was shot on. So it'll make copying and pasting and kind of iterating that edit through the timeline a lot faster if I know which camera shot what. So one of the first things I'll do is I'll go through and just create or color these files according to the camera that they were colored on. So I go through and I assign a specific label color, these colors over here to the left, to the different cameras, right? And so I think I already created a note for this project in my external brain, which should be here, editing. Yes, so these are the cameras I used, and actually that can be edited, but whatever. And these are the colors that I'll use. And so I'm pretty sure I assigned these colors to hotkeys in Premiere Pro for a past project. And so what I'll do is I'll kind of just reference this. I'll say FX3 is teal. Great. And so highlight all of those. And I think my hotkey was Command Option. Yeah, there you go. 2. Command Option 2. And just to check, let's do it the tedious way and check. And yeah, that looks like teal up there. Great. Okay, so A74, that one is iris color, whatever the heck that is. And that's Command Option 1. And that's kind of the default. And so now it's just the tedious process of going through and labeling all of these. FX3, FX3. All right, so I got all my footage colored, and one of the reasons this is nice is because if I know, and this usually comes in with a specialty camera like a drone, but if I want to just search for drone footage, right, instead of going in each day and toggling down all of those, I can search by label, right? So I can come up here and do a metadata search for what did I color that? Lavender. And that'll create a folder with all of my drone footage for the trip, right? So it's kind of a higher order way of organizing footage based on camera, and that's another advantage to going through and doing it that way. And so I can get rid of that, or I could keep it, it doesn't matter. So the next thing I'll do is I'll go through and I will organize by frame rate. So because my drone has a default video type, media type of video, and both of my Sony cameras have a default media type of movie, in order to get all of my footage into one folder, and I'll show you why I'm doing that in a second, I need to create this search bin that is media type movie or video, because if I did and video, it would search for only files that are both types, and that would return nothing. All right, so I've got this folder. I'm gonna toggle down everything else, and this should just be a bucket folder of all of my footage for the entire trip. And we are going to remove that because that was a testing thing. Oh, we can't remove that, whatever. That was just a adjustment layer that I created. Okay, so the reason I want to do this is because I shot in a number of different frame rates. As you'll see, some 60 frames per second sneak in here. I know there's 120 frames per second in here in places. There's one. And so why that matters is because the way I handle slow motion is I don't shoot S&M such that it ingests at 24 frames per second and is already slow. I do that all on the back end because I think that I get a higher quality footage when I shoot at 120 frames per second and then transcribe it to 23 frames per second in Premiere Pro. So I'll organize by frame rate, right? And I always work in 24 frames per second. All my timelines are in 24 frames per second because that's the correct way to do things. That's not true. There's other ways to do things, but that's just the way I do it. 48. I shot some 48. That's weird. And then what I'll go through and do is I'll change their speed, right? So that's Command R. And I've already done this for these three to 50%, right? So it's 48 to 24, that's twice as fast. So I adjust the speed by 50%. So now if I drag those into a timeline, let's just create a timeline from that new sequence from clip, right? It will be in slow motion at 50%. So not super slow motion, but slow enough, right? Great. Versus if, why are you open? Versus if I were to drag in 23 frames per second, that is obviously shaky and at normal speed, right? Okay, so we did our 48, and that means we're on to 60, and there's a lot of 60s. It's probably the one I shoot the most at, Command R, and that is going to be changed to 40%. Okay, so now if we take in one of these, drop it in here, that's a really exciting clip. It is definitely an accidental record clip, but you can see the grass is blowing in slow motion, so we did it right. And then finish up with all the 120s, Command R, and that is at 20%. Okay, and let's look at one of those. Yep, nice and slow motion-y. Bingo. All right, so that means all of our footage is now handled correctly as far as the rate at which we want it to play. Great. This is also the time that historically I would create proxies. And because I upgraded my computer to this fancy Mac Studio, I don't really need to do that anymore. So that I'm just going to skip. If you're interested in my proxy workflow, I'm happy to create a video to that effect, but there are also 100 other proxy workflow videos out there that will do the trick. So go find one of those, or ask me to make one, doesn't matter, either way. Okay, so that's plenty long for a video. Definitely probably too long, but you know, it is what it is. Thanks for being here if you're still here. I think in the next video, what I'd like to do is kind of go into the next step, which for me is just theoretically how I dig into the footage, going through selects and picking selects, but then also meta logging, and I'll talk more about that in that video. But so I think, yeah, that's it for today. So thank you, and until next time, adios.